From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Consider This with Kathy Wyatt, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
I will call as many sessions as it takes to finish the long overdue work of solving our property tax crisis.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 27th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, the 2024 legislative session. Joining us to talk more about it are Nebraska State Senators Megan Hunt and George Dungan. Senator Hunt represents the 8th District, Senator Dungan the 26th. He is also a member of the Revenue Committee. Thank you both so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you, Kathy. It's great to be back on your show.
Oh, I should say welcome back to you and welcome to you.
Yeah,
right?
Thanks for having me for a first time. Really excited to be here.
You bet. I want to start with the basics. How do you define the legislature?
Well, the Nebraska State Legislature is very unique and very special because, as a lot of your viewers probably know but might not know, we have the only one house, officially nonpartisan legislature in the country. And it's also the smallest legislature in the country with just 49 members. And so that gives us a lot of opportunities to collaborate and compromise and work together in ways that you don't necessarily see throughout the rest of the country. But it also opens up a lot of opportunities for the people of Nebraska, who we sometimes call the second house, to weigh in on legislation. They can come to any committee hearing they want and testify. And I do think that our legislature, no matter what ideology you have, no matter what party you have, I think Nebraska state senators are uniquely responsive to their constituents in a way that you might not see in other states.
Okay, thank you. Senator Dungan, we're going to put up a map of the state. And as we're doing that, talk with us a little bit more specifically about what we're seeing there.
Well, so what you got here are the different districts that were broken down to for the state of Nebraska. So like Senator Hunt said, there's only 49 state senators. And so each senator represents a legislative district. I, for example, am from legislative district 26, which is predominantly just northeast Lincoln. But here on the map, you see a breakdown of where all those districts are. What's really fascinating about it is you have a lot of different sized districts and a lot of different things contained in each of those. That being said, the population in each of these districts is about the same. So every district is about 40,000 people. And so that's why in some of these areas, like here in Omaha or in Lincoln or other urban settings, you're going to get a geographically smaller district, whereas with some of these larger areas, you'll see 43 or 47 out there. In western Nebraska, you have geographically larger districts just by virtue of not having a very dense population.
Okay. You know, look at District 43. Senator Brewer represents that district right now. How do you knock doors out there? Like, look how gigantic that is. And then in my district, District 8, which is the neighborhoods of Dundee and Benson in Midtown Omaha, I can walk that district in a day. And so it's really just where the population is centered. But we ensure through redistricting in the last couple of years, too, every 10 years we do redistricting, that every senator represents the same amount of people.
Okay. Senator Dungan, let's talk legislative terms. What are those?
Well, so every senator is elected to a term of 4 years. And we currently have term limits where you're able to serve for 2 consecutive terms, so 8 years total. At that point in time, you are constitutionally here in Nebraska term limited out. But after a session or a term rather passes, you can then come back. So for example, we have Senator Danielle Conrad right now who represented the Fightin' 46th for 8 years and then was gone and then came back after Senator Moorfeld served another 8 years. So you are term limited to that time period, but you can come back.
Okay.
What's also really interesting about it is each of those terms consists of 2 bienniums. And so what that means is it's 2 legislatures. So, for example, I just finished up my first biennium having been elected in 2022. I served 1 year, which was a long session, so it takes place for 90 days. And then this last session was 60 days. And so that then concludes the first of those bienniums, and then that repeats itself. So you have 4 bienniums that you serve if you're lucky enough to be there for 8 years.
Okay, so he mentioned 1 year it's 60, 1 year it's 90. It's odd even, right?
That's right. In even numbered years, it's a short session, so 60 days. In odd numbers, it's a long session, so 90 days. And every biennium, there's a new legislature. After the election this year in November, we will have at least 15 new state senators. And that'll be new dynamics, new relationships, new opportunities for understanding the priorities, not only of the new senators, but the constituents they represent and the things that they heard at the doors and at town halls and things while they were campaigning. In Nebraska, our legislature turns over and churns out, pretty quickly every 2 years.
Okay, 2024, kind of behind us, but not really. There's the possibility of a special session this summer. Senator Dungan, what's the reason behind that?
Well, there's a number of reasons, I think, that kind of led to where we are here today. But to put it quite simply, at the end of our last session, we did not, as a legislature, pass a bill, LB 388. And contained in LB 388 were some proposals that the governor had put forward with regards to increasing sales tax on certain individuals in an effort to maybe offset some property tax. And so when we didn't pass that, the governor came out on the last day and gave a speech to the legislature where he said that he intends to call a special session to bring us back during the interim in order to continue addressing property tax relief for the state of Nebraska.
Okay, we're going to delve into that further in a few minutes. But first, Senator Hunt, I want to talk about what did happen between January 3rd and April 18th. What were some of the major items on the agenda?
I would love you to chime in on this too, Senator Dungan. I think we had a very successful session. I think we had a great session. We got a lot of things accomplished. We did a lot for families and children, reimbursements for daycare, for childcare. We made sure to extend the summer EBT program for people who are struggling and need food assistance. Now they're going to be able to get that throughout the summer, which is amazing. We lifted the 2-year ban on people with felonies coming out of the system and being able to vote again. So we're going to have more democratic representation in Nebraska because of that work. Senator George Dungan had a bill to improve Medicaid reimbursement for prenatal services. What I really liked about this session is, at the end of the day, after these 60 days, we're all still basically getting along. I feel like no relationships were like super burned, which is really good politically when you want your legislative body, your governing body to be functional. And I think that we stayed away from some of the more controversial issues that A, could have blown up the session and made us a lot less productive, and B, Nebraskans really don't want us working on these things. They want us working on things that improve their quality of life, that help them have a good job, that's increasing our workforce, that's making sure kids are getting a better education. And, we agreed about a lot, we disagreed about a lot, but at the end of the day, I think it was a good session. It was productive.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that, compared to my first year in the legislature to what we had this last year, it was night and day. Coming into the legislature, my first session was mired with these hyper-partisan sort of social issues that, frankly, no constituent of mine had ever talked to me about. And so coming into the legislature, I'd heard over and over again, this is a nonpartisan body. You're going to get along with your colleagues. The relationships that you develop here are going to be some of the best friends that you have your entire life. So I was really excited about that, given our nonpartisan nature and whatnot. But unfortunately, the issues that some of our colleagues decided to focus on in that first session that I had were really just hyper-partisan, and they dragged everything down. So my first 90 days that I was there, I don't think I really had an opportunity to see how the legislature works. So after my first session, people would ask me, how do you like the legislature? And I would sort of jokingly but sort of seriously say, I'll let you know when I see it. Because that first session, it wasn't what I'd heard from colleagues like Senator Hunt.
It was so weird. It was so unusual. And I felt so bad for your class, Senator Dungan. I felt so bad for this incoming class in 2023 because, yeah, it is a very positive place. It is a very productive body. And they didn't really get the opportunity last session to experience that. So this year, compared to last year, very productive, very positive, and we got some great things done for Nebraskans. It may not be everything the governor wanted, but who among us got everything we wanted?
Well, and so what do you attribute that to? I mean, you come out of a rocky year, you go into one that you're saying overall went really well. What happened?
I think it was a lot of intentionality. I mean, we spent the entire
the
entire interim this last year getting ready for this last session we had, talking to colleagues, both across the proverbial aisle and people we work with on a regular basis, and the leadership, talking to the speaker a lot, saying we want to focus on the issues that we think are going to affect a lot of Nebraskans, get back to focusing on things like workforce, healthcare, and those kind of things. And I think a lot of us spent a lot of time trying to be so intentional about that, and it worked. A good example of that, Senator Hunt brought up my priority bill, the Prenatal Plus program, LB 857. That sort of stemmed out of me spending a lot of time this summer thinking, what is an issue that I think we could all get along about? What is an issue that we, at the end of the day, should not just see as bipartisan, but nonpartisan? And, finding ways to increase access to services for prenatal care seemed like a good idea for that. So, myself, Senator Hunt, a number of our colleagues tried really hard to make that happen. And so I think that was frankly very successful in righting the ship of the legislature based on what we thought people actually cared about.
I find that interesting. Oh, not to interrupt,
No,
but to hear you say that, it begs the question, a follow-up question of, okay, so you hit a really good point there. You have to really think this through and try to figure out, okay, who are the people I am here to serve, and what is it that they are wanting or needing to make this state a better place, right? So it's that intentionality and also that thought you were going to say.
Well, it's what are my constituents telling me is important to them, not what are commentators on MSNBC or Fox News telling me. And I think sometimes there's a tendency as an elected official to play senator, like little children play house. What does a mommy do? What does a daddy do? What does a senator do? Now I'm going to just act like that based on what I see from media and pop culture and things like that. But we really have this, with the term limits and everything we've been talking about, we really have such a short time in this position with this very powerful platform to affect positive change for the people who have trusted us to have this job. And, and that's not the time for the problem of the day from Fox News or the outrage of the week from MSNBC or whatever. It's what is actually affecting Nebraskans in my district, in my neighborhood. What are they telling me at the coffee shop? What are they telling me in the pickup line for school? And, it's not always easy. I know I have a reputation as a controversial figure in the legislature. I'm willing to do controversial things and take on these issues, but we really had to keep the focus this year on not giving into that temptation to fight, because I'll fight, but not giving into that and just trying to stay productive. And I think we did accomplish that.
So having said all of that, Senator Dungan, was there anything that didn't necessarily go well that may have posed, a setback maybe you weren't expecting or whatever the case may be there?
Yeah, I think that obviously in any session there's going to be things that don't go perfectly. And like Senator Hunt said earlier, nobody gets everything they want. But that being said, I think we did have some real missed opportunities this year, not just to do things that actually help our constituents and help people, but to also reclaim some of our autonomy as a legislature. I don't want to drum up any sort of bad feelings, but Senator Hunt's priority bill, which passed with broad, wide-ranging, bipartisan support, ultimately was vetoed by the governor. And despite a lot of really hard work that went into that, we were not able to override that veto, despite the fact that if you just looked at the people who had supported that bill on the first sort of pass through, we would have had ample folks to do that. And I think that was a real missed opportunity, because what I've always been told, again, being new here and listening to senators who have been here, it's that the legislature shouldn't operate just as a partisan body doing the bidding of somebody or something else, but that we act as our own sort of authority. And when our autonomy is taken from us as a legislature, historically, I think we've come together to say we're going to take that back. And I think we had a real missed opportunity this year to reclaim a little bit of that autonomy and to demonstrate to both sides of the aisle that we're not just going to do what people think we're going to do for political purposes, but we're going to do what's right. And so, when I was thinking about failures this year, that was one that really came to mind, because really we did have a lot more successes than failures, but I was very disappointed to see that we weren't able to come together and get that done. And without going into all the details, I think it really was political. And it was the kind of politics that you hear people complain about when you knock on doors. People say, well, I don't want this to be D.C., I don't want this to be, the swamp or whatever. And for the most part, we're not. Nebraska is, I think, divorced from that in a really real way, but we're seeing more and more of it seep into our politics. And we're seeing more and more of that happen. So I guess that was one of the few times I was very disappointed in our body as a whole this session for not standing up for what I think was right.
So, Senator Hunt, how do you How do you learn from that and grow from that, right? And mend those fences? I mean, what's the answer then?
Man, sometimes I feel like all I do is mend fences. All I do is have coffees with people so we can get along again. But like, this is also the nature of the work. I mean, in the legislature, you check in at 9 a.m. and you're fighting with someone until 10:30, and then we switch the bill, and then you're on the same side as that person until noon. Then we all have lunch together in the cafeteria, chit-chatting about our kids and grandkids. And then at 1:30, we're back fighting again on various sides. And so it's not even that, like, fences have to be mended or there's rifts in relationships that are insurmountable. It's that the legislature needs to continue to stand in its own power, to have the pride and the knowledge that we are a separate branch of government. We have exactly as much authority as the executive branch does. We were all sent here by our constituents to do a job, and we should, you know, how you gonna raise all this money and knock all these doors and do all this work to get elected, and then not stand in that power and take it? So that is what I guess I would like to see in more of my colleagues. And I echo what Senator Dungan said about any disappointments from this session just being about ceding maybe too much of our power as an oversight authority. I mean, we lost a lot of opportunities for oversight in the legislature this year. And just our independence as a separate branch of government, which we should be very proud of and very defensive of, because we are the ones that represent the people.
Thank you. There was talk then of this special session. I want to ask a few questions about this, right? So first of all, how do you define a special session, Senator Dungan?
Oh, it's a good question. I think it can be defined a number of different ways. Generally speaking, the special session, as I understand it, the governor can call us into a special session for a particular purpose. It doesn't have to just be one subject, but it does have to be a stated call of what the legislature would come to address. Or the legislature can call itself into a special session. And so there's a couple of different options or opportunities we would have to come back and address issues during the interim. But what we're talking about a lot this interim is a special session called by the governor. When you're talking about an issue as broad as property tax reform, what that really means, I think, is that a special session could address any number of issues. And what I think people need to understand is that just because we come back for that one particular issue, it doesn't mean we have to operate in sort of this myopic view. There's other things we can do in a special session if, for example, the call is property taxes, and we'll get more into this, I'm sure, in a minute, but talk about revenue generators, talk about the way we fund education, talk about any number of things that ultimately touch on property tax. And so the idea is that we would come back to address this subject, but certainly I think my colleagues and I are creative enough that we can address a number of different things in addressing that subject in order to better help Nebraskans and achieve whatever that goal might be.
So how common is a special session?
They are not very common. We've had 52 special sessions in the history of the state. I've been through a couple special sessions already, which is unusual. We had one for COVID, of course. That was very important to make sure that we were passing new policies to get people the resources they needed during that crisis. We had a special session for redistricting because it took Nebraska a little longer than usual to get our census data back in 2020. And then this potentially, this year would be my third special session if we end up going back. But there have been 52 in the history of Nebraska, and they've touched on things from the death penalty to Medicaid expansion to oil pipelines, various topics.
Okay, so property taxes here. I think it would be beneficial to talk, Senator Dungan, about how Nebraska compares to other states when it comes to property taxes. Can you just make that really concise for us and give us just the brief answer to that?
And go.
Brevity is not a thing I get a lot of credit for on a regular basis, but I will try to be as concise as possible. First of all, I'll say, when I talk to my colleagues in other states, right, who are state legislators in any other state, their constituents are also upset about property tax. Like, I want to be very clear, we are not unique insofar as we've done something wrong, and we are the only state that deals with these issues. So it is an issue that happens everywhere. That being said, based on data that I was able to find relatively recently, I do think that Nebraska is in the top 10 for the property tax collected. So we do focus a lot on property tax. Again, though, that being said, the neighbors that you see in that top 10 are other similar states to us, right? We don't have massive amounts of industry other than ag the way that some other states do. So when you're looking at your big three income, sales, and property tax, and trying to figure out what is the appropriate amount to take from each of those in order to properly fund your state, you have to look at the state that you're in. And so that is, I think, one of the fundamental premises of why property tax is something that's a little bit higher here in Nebraska. So we are certainly, I think, high on the high end of the 50 states, and that's something we should address. And I want to sort of say that at the outset. Every senator that I talk to, of the 49 of us, agree that we have to address property taxes, and that's a thing that our constituents talk to us about on a very regular basis. And so we all agree what the problem is. The question is just how do we get there? And how do we get there in a way that is ultimately, I think, equitable and actually helps every Nebraskan instead of just serving special interests. But that's, again, brevity is not my strong suit, but that's sort of where we stand currently with regard to property taxes.
Okay, and you're on the Revenue Committee.
Correct.
So its main goal, right, big picture perspective, and then you start drilling down, right? What would you add to that?
With regard to the revenue,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
what's interesting about the Revenue Committee is we touch a lot of different subjects, and so there are some committees that are very niche, right? I also sit on the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee, and while that can also be broad, it's a little bit more of a niche subject area, right? The Revenue Committee, on the other hand, is very broad, and so anything that has anything to do with taxation or affecting taxes, I mean, we could even be talking about school funding, political subdivisions, the way they operate. The Revenue Committee does see a lot of different subjects. And I think similar to the Appropriations Committee, the Revenue is one of those committees where you really got to kind of see the big picture before you can make decisions. So every biennium we come up with a new budget, and then in the short sessions we do mid-biennium adjustments to that budget. But there's a lot of things that you can't say what's actually going to happen until you look at the big picture of how much money are we making and how much money are we spending. And so I think that's another thing that makes the Revenue Committee interesting, is you have a lot of senators come to you and say, here are my thoughts, here's my plans, here's what I'd like to see happen. And you have to kind of wait and say, let's get an idea as to how this all operates. What's also interesting about the Revenue Committee is the makeup of it. You do have a lot of urban and rural folks on the committee, and I think what's interesting about that is oftentimes you see a divide in the way that people think about tax policy in urban and rural areas. And so the committee, at least I think, attempts to make up a pretty good breakdown of the kind of people that are in Nebraska. And so we do have urban folks and rural folks on the committee trying to come to some consensus about how tax policy should work here in Nebraska.
So Governor Pillen's proposal, in a nutshell, is what?
If I were to try to boil down the proposal that we originally got from the governor, which came out during this last interim, where we started to hear ideas from the governor's office of what he would like to see happen, what we saw was a reduction in property taxes, but an increase in sales tax. And so immediately, right off the bat, you started to hear people from all across the political spectrum, experts on the subject, say that's not a tax reduction, that's a tax shift. And so what he was trying to achieve was this goal of decreasing property tax, but in order to make up for that financially, was a 2-cent increase in sales tax. 2 cents sounds like a little amount when you just say the words 2 cents, but a 2-cent increase in our sales tax is something like a 35 to 36% increase in sales tax. Ultimately, that did get dropped down to a 1 cent increase, but that's still almost a 16 or 17% increase in sales tax. And so immediately, we started to hear from constituents that this was a bad idea, right? That this was going to disproportionately hurt middle class and lower class people. And what I think is also strange, what I have questions about with regards to this plan is where a lot of these numbers came from, right? The governor came out and I think originally said he wanted to decrease property tax by 40%. I can't find out where that 40% comes from. And this is coming off of a session last year where we actually did deliver historic property tax relief for Nebraskans. And the governor's own office and a number of senators had touted during the interim all that we did in order to reduce property taxes during my first year. And then to come back and have this sort of 40% goal, I'm curious as to where that came from, because it doesn't seem to actually line up with any metrics that I can seem to find from anybody I've talked to.
We have 3 minutes left, Senator Dungan. Should a special session actually happen, mindful of the best interest of Nebraskans, what has to happen?
I think we have to make sure that we're not decreasing property taxes on the backs of everyday working people. So like I said, if we're talking about increasing the sales tax, that's just going to be a non-starter for me and a number of my colleagues, again, from the left and the right. We have to make sure we're actually helping everyday people.
Okay. All right. So moving forward, and actually I did want to ask both of you this, and we do just have a couple minutes remaining. We're just days away from the primary. Thoughts for voters, Senator Hunt?
My thoughts for voters, we mentioned earlier, we're getting at least 15 new state senators this year. And in Nebraska, we have a unique system, and you can actually really get to know the people who represent you. Find out who is going to be on your ballot and try to make a really educated choice about who you're going to support there, because let me tell you, it is not Jefferson and Lincoln down there. You do not have to be a genius to run for office or get elected. And that's not to put down anybody, but I would apply that to myself as well, of course. And so, we have a very huge responsibility to make sure that the people who are representing us are going to have the best interests of Nebraskans in mind. So just take a look at the ballot, go to an event, go to a town hall, go meet the people who are trying to be the person making decisions for you. Whether it's state or local or federal, whatever, get involved as well as you can.
Okay, thank you. 30 seconds, Senator Dungan.
When I went to bed on the night that I was elected, I was only up by 87 votes.
What he's going to say.
So when people say my vote doesn't matter and they don't want to get involved in politics, they're wrong. When it comes to Nebraska, when it comes to local elections, literally a handful of people can make or break who represents a district. So your vote does matter.
Okay.
Senator Frederickson was also by like 70 votes or something like that.
He was down on election night.
These are very close elections. Your vote matters.
We're talking 2024 legislative session with Senators Dungan and Hunt. I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us and the service, the immense service you're providing to our state. I want to thank you for that. Folks wanting more information can go here, nebraskalegislature.gov, legislature help at leg.ne.gov, or you can call 402-471-2271. Thanks again to the two of you.
Thank you.
You bet.
My
To our
pleasure.
students who are working so hard behind the scenes, and to all of you for watching. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television in the School of Communication. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call the UNO School of Communication at 402-554-2600 during regular business hours. Or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.